So are you ladies surprised that even now, for someone like me or even younger people, that the Beatles are changing lives still? Are you surprised at all? Or would you even have thought that would have been happening when you were young?
I'm not surprised at all. Not surprised at all. There was something so unique, so fresh, and so lasting about them. You know what? I think that generations of fans of Carol and myself is first, second generation, third generation. You know, there's almost fourth generation fans now, okay? My little grandson that my daughter plays Beatle music to just turned 4. When he was like 2 years old, he was loving Drive My Car. Loving it.
Drive my car.
He loved that song. He would dance and enjoy. And you know what? They'll last forever, as we know, classical music, and they'll just be there. I so appreciate that they're still as popular and as followed as they are. I love it when people like yourself, Allison, will venture and become immersed in the subject and realize its importance in culture, history, politics, lifestyle. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything. It's beautiful. And I look at it as a justification of who I am and what I have done in my life by knowing, you know what? In contrast to all these people who were naysayers, and as Carol said, all the people around her, oh, they're just a fad and they're be gone in 6 months or then gone in a year and no one will remember them. But boy, I always knew in my heart they'd be around. I knew their importance and I knew their lasting power because people like yourself are still learning from them and spending time understanding them. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing that people like yourself still study, people talk about them, debate them. And even the naysayers who say, oh, they're just so sad, because I still go online and I still see people who, you know, on videos put thumbs down on YouTube and all this stuff. But you know what? They're still talking about them, so they think enough about them to even spend the time to watch it. So I rest my case in being a Beatle fan. And to all those naysayers in Oakland, New Jersey, who in the Grand Union spoke badly to my mother and I, down on them.
End of intermission. Part 2.
I have another little thing that popped out was I wanted to know more about all the women that I was seeing in the show. Well, I was looking at what they were wearing and what their hairstyles were. And I wanted to know who the office people were. Like, wait, who's that lady? I know there were a lot of men converging, tech guys and truck people and all of that. But I found myself saying, oh, I like what she's got on a miniskirt, or she's doing that or that. And I noticed that even on the street, I wanted to talk more to those people. I wondered who they were and, you know.
I know, right? You really want to know what they're thinking at that point, because you could tell some of them were really into it and some of the people were just so, you know, British and just stirred by what noise is coming down, and you just don't do those things. It really showed the world as how things were clashing between different people of one generation versus another, and the tolerance level and things like that. But Carol, along with looking at the women and who the women were, and yeah, most of them were like, you know, secretarial support staff. Unfortunately, something that we hopefully don't see that much of, the workers at the fan club there, or workers at, you know, Seville, but who I was fascinated by, and what I really wanted to bring up with everyone here today is the Mal Evans story. Because I have to tell you, I met Mal on a couple of occasions. And I really, in the scenes with him, he took my attention away from what was going on with the Beatles and a lot of the activity. From what I've heard, there's a project or a book coming out with Mal's son, Gary.
Ken Womack's book.
Mm-hmm. And a really fascinating devotion to the Beatles he had that was not always reciprocated. Yeah. And I think that this really showed me what I had somewhat known, but always felt, is that Mal there wasn't given his due by the whole Beatle organization. And when I rewatch it, I'm going to watch it in a little bit different way, but I just want to share and hear anyone who, when you spoke with Peter Jackson, I don't know, Robert, if you even talked about, because I haven't heard it all the way through your interview, if you got to talk about Mal and the importance of Mal, but you saw him there in almost every scene, working and bringing tea and lifting this. And
he was writing lyrics.
And suggesting changes of lyrics. Yeah. It's like he's providing input.
He wrote changes for Sgt. Pepper. He contributed an incredible amount where they never really gave him the credit. He started like with Neil, and Neil ended up running Apple. Right. And there was Mal, so many years later, still carrying speakers. What's the story with that? I don't know, but I'm looking forward to reading more about Mal and seeing what happens, because the life was so tragic.
Yeah, dead at 40.
So Womack has a book coming out, and I believe Peter Hicks has a book coming out. Is there a third one? Did you mention a third one, or is it?
There's the only two that I know of.
Yeah, I think his son was contributing to one.
Correct, to Ken's, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there's been excerpts of his diaries made public, and most of them are very mundane, like, drove 300 miles last night to this gig or whatever. But there was one entry that has aired that's very insightful. And the biggest thing that's striking to me about it is the timing of it. It's dated January 13th, 1969. Well, what day is that? That's the day after the meeting at Ringo's house. It's 3 days after George left on the 10th, quit the Beatles. And so this is what you see in Get Back, is when they're sitting around having that discussion. Wouldn't it be silly 50 years from now if people say the Beatles broke up because Yoko sat on an amp? It's that day. And he writes in his diary, he's basically having this crisis that he's facing where he feels he's being sort of ill-used by the Beatles, that this wasn't the life he expected for himself. All I do is fetch and carry. And he says, big boys don't cry, I suppose. And so he's feeling very sorry for himself at that moment. Maybe it's indicative of feeling down, as they all were with George's walkout, and not knowing quite what it meant or what they were going to do with it. Or maybe it was him in that moment realizing, as you said, Deb, that he was kind of ill-used. And it's funny because I guess if you were to draw a conclusion, they saw him as they saw him from the very beginning, even though things had changed. He used to be the guy that worked as sort of security for them. He carried their amps. He was the guy who did the stage setup, all these mundane tasks. And then you get that great moment in Get Back where they're working on Maxwell, and as they're cutting out for the day, Paul calls out over his shoulder, anvil and a hammer. We're going to need an anvil and a hammer. And Mal's like, what? And the next cut you see, there's a hammer and an anvil. He's done his job, which is to fulfill the Beatles' every whim and do it quickly and on demand. And there was nobody better at that. But it's clear that, at least at that time, in the moment, he was feeling like, is this all there is for me? Is this what I was meant to do? As you say, he was so devoted to the Beatles that he had a son and a daughter. Spending all the time with the Beatles, he was barely seeing them grow up. And then, of course, he went off to America and missed the last few years. So it's really a sad story that I am looking forward to what Ken comes up with and getting him more of his due, because he was as essential in his way, maybe not on the level of a George Martin or a Brian Epstein, but certainly they kept him around and relied on him.
Was it him that George was asking to fetch shoes?
Shoes and Get Back, you're right.
Yeah, but it was Mel. It was Mel.
It was Mel,
Okay.
yeah. In the Hunter Davies book, there's the John Lennon quote, "Socks, Mel," and then he comes and provides him with a selection of socks. So stupid things like that, he was always at the beck and call for.
I loved him and I loved seeing him. And Deb, you're right. It's heartbreaking. But I also know that he must have known the rarity of his position and how valuable he was. Yes, you don't feel appreciated, but I don't think you could have pried him out of that job. And service is also love.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much love in that organization and respect and kindness. Just look at the way when George Martin would enter the room, he didn't, now listen, you guys, you got to do this. And he was kind and respectful. There was a decorum and there was so much positive energy. I've been a servant many a time to people who are just barking out commands, but I also know I'm there because I want to be, and that there is great love behind everything that's going on. He should have had more credit given, especially when anytime as a creator, you contribute something, a phrase or a character, you need to get credit for that. That's your intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
He gave without question. He wanted to be part of the team.
Every great story, there's always somebody behind. There's always that character behind. Multiple ones in the Beatles case.
Right.
And there's always somebody like Billy that shows up.
Billy, yes. Wasn't that miraculous?
Oh, Deb, what'd you think of Billy?
Oh boy. I'm going to take a pass on Billy right now, okay?
Did you know him personally in your line of work or no? Okay.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, I didn't. I don't really have much to say on Billy.
The thing is that he wasn't a Nicky Hopkins, and Nicky Hopkins was a great utility player.
He was beyond talented. I've been seeing a lot of him lately. That's why, because I'm working on these Ed Sullivan Show clips, and he was on Ed Sullivan. He did a duet, Agent 007, with Ray Charles. And it was just yesterday that I was actually looking at the clip. I never met Billy. I never saw him in person. Played at the Troubadour a lot, but I wasn't here in LA yet. But I think that he was a beyond talented person. And I don't know, he just pulled it together, didn't he? I think he did just so wonderfully. I don't know. I have no personal insight into Billy Preston, but just from watching and knowing who he is and from a fan's point of view. Which Beatle was it who I've read that said, oh, if they had gone on, maybe he would have ended up continuing to play with the Beatles?
Yeah, that was John that floated that to Paul, who immediately swatted it down.
Said no, right?
Yeah. I wonder if he came to regret that.
Yeah, but he brought so much.
He brought the curve.
He did, right?
He brought the mojo. Like Paul said, I'm just a guy from the north of England. I don't have soul.
Yeah, when Billy plays the soulful.
Yeah. I just so appreciated him in what he did.
It was like a throwback to their early years where it just seemed when things were going nowhere, the right person at exactly the right time would drop into their lives, whether it was a Brian or a George Martin or whoever. And he was that. It was like a throwback to that. It's like we're swimming in circles here, trying to get a handle on this project. And it's funny, and I love the way Peter Jackson, as he talked about in our conversation, that things that would come up in talks caught on tape that they didn't think were important, they'd pass by and reject. And then suddenly when they're on day 13 or whatever, oh, didn't we have a reference to that like at day 2? And he talks about when George expresses his admiration of Billy Preston very early on, who they haven't seen since Hamburg, but they've seen him on TV or whatever. And then later on, they're talking about, these songs work better if we had a keyboard player for some of them. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, he drops, like Orion said in one of our shows, like an angel from the sky. Yeah. He happened to be the right guy. He could have been abrasive. He could have been somebody that was seen as, Paul, that's your guy. That's not our guy. Like if it was Jeff Lynne, that's your guy, George. That's not our guy. Everybody loved him. And again, it circled back to what they bring up over and over again, their Hamburg days. They knew him from Hamburg. So therefore, he was in, boy. You know, it's like if Klaus Bormann played keyboards and he wandered in, it would have been no question. He's an insider. He knew us back when. We value that above all. He's family. It was just miraculous.
I like that concept of many fifth Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Many.
It's fluid.
There's just been, like you said, there's been so many people fill that position. So the fifth Beatle happens to be the right person at the right time,
Right.
Yeah.
whoever that person is.
One thing that I found really fascinating, and I think it was going through lockdown and finishing a thesis. The job I had at the time wasn't remote, so I couldn't work. And so that was non-consecutive 10 months of just having time to do it. Just a lot of time. And I think this just shows part of their greatness at this point was also having the time. The majority of bands don't have this amount of time and this amount of support and the space for this. And so there were distractions. Of course, they distracted themselves, but you're going to go crazy if you work straight through all day. But I did admire the time because I think we all want all of that time to create. And if we did just have an endless amount of time in that case all day, part of their strength is having time in this.
Well, I like that deadline aspect. That they had to come up with 14 songs in 3 weeks. I mean, that's just like, what?
Right.
Didn't we just do a double
I mean,
album?
I'm working on a deadline right now for this book, and it is very motivating when you know I got to have 3 pages done by the end of the week, or I'm going to do whatever. It is motivating. You got to be there to begin with. Like, you don't start from scratch under deadline. You're already in the game. And the deadline just helps you to push it forward. And so they were all popping out songs, weren't they?
Even
And
Ringo.
you got Ringo even came up with a tune, you know, help the cause of the 14.
Right.
I just enjoyed Ringo. I enjoyed his fashion as well.
Completely at peace with their role. He didn't have to jockey like George did, trying to ascend to the top tier as somebody whose talent warranted it. He knew his place, and boy, was he the rock they depended on, take after take after take.
He just knew when to come in with the.
Yeah. And Linda had a nice thing to say about him as well in the beginning.
I feel the most calm around him or something like that.
Yeah, he has the most calm demeanor.
Yeah.
Or something along the lines of that.
And you hear that on the Nagras, like when other heavier discussions are taking place, he and Linda are bantering about kids and animals and things like that.
Yeah.
I get that about Ringo, like he was very at ease, making people feel at ease and welcome.
You know, that was just his way to be that. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be nice. And he just was.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are like, you know how there's a cake and you taste the sweetness, but you know it can't be there without the flour. And so he seems to have that basicness, you know, and it's every time he knew exactly how to throw the riff. And then I loved watching him. He would watch them and he could read what was needed. Like, it's almost like he was listening. He looked like he might have just been sitting there, but you could tell he was reading what was going on so that he could then go back and figure out the right way to shuffle out whatever needed to happen.
Absolutely. That's not a skill set to be taken lightly, that knowing when to hang back and observe and listen and then serve up exactly what's needed, whether it's musically or if there's a tense situation going on, some lightness, you know, crack some kind of joke that's going to disarm everybody. That is so essential for when you've got a group of really strong personalities. And it is a testament to the value they placed on him very early on when Michael Lindsay Hogg is pushing for, you know, Tunisia and all these great exotic locations. You'll find that we're not leaving, we're not going abroad, because Ringo is the one that doesn't want to go abroad.
I'm not going. Michael Lindsay Hogg. Oh, God.
God bless him.
Then his voice would kick in and he'd bring it up again and he kept bringing it up again. It's like,
We wouldn't have any of this without him. So,
Sure.
you know,
That's
Right.
you
true.
got to give him a little credit, right?
Yeah.
True.
Whose idea was it initially to do this film?
Can you guess?
Paul's.
Yes.
I guessed it. Okay.
Yeah. And it was because they had worked with Michael when they did the promo film for David Frost's show of Hey Jude. And
Yeah.
there they were on a stage with fans, this big crowd of fans. And Paul's the one that misses performing live the most. And they all got such a buzz out of it. It's like, So what can we do under controlled conditions where we have some kind of audience energy to feed off of? And so they were trying to figure out that way. And originally they're going to do some dates at the Roundhouse in London, which is a small venue. They were going to do that at the end of the year. And the Elvis TV special had aired in December. In December, John was part of the Rock and Roll Circus with Michael Lindsay Hogg. So these big artists are doing these TV specials, and that's when the idea gets conceived. Why don't we do one ending in some kind of live performance with controlled conditions, not the screamers in Shea Stadium, but something we can get a handle on so we can get that buzz off of them and still be doing something. And they all agreed to it, and it just kind of morphed into what it became. But that was always the intent.
I want to go back to the Ringo conversation real quick because I love Ringo. I really do. And one thing that I keep going through in my head, and I'm working on a piece on Ringo on this, is why do we, in this day and age, why do we still have to try to say, well, he's not a songwriter, he's not John and Paul? Why can't we just celebrate him for all of these amazing things we clearly see him doing and his ability to be a fantastic drummer? Like, it's not enough for a lot of Beatles fans. It's not enough sometimes. And I was like, why can't what Ringo does be enough? It's fantastic.
You know who's never criticized him? Musicians. If you have the idea in your head of what a drummer is supposed to be, and you're thinking anything from Bonham to Moon to Neil Peart, well, he's not that, therefore he sucks. Or he's not a songwriter, therefore he sucks. That kind of, the bar has been set for expectations, I guess maybe because you're in the Beatles. You've got Lennon, McCartney, and George, who's also an amazing songwriter. What's your problem, Ringo? Octopus's Garden? What the hell? It's terribly unfair. But then you look at how the power of the visual is so strong and compelling, and how he is used in their films. He's the man-child in Hard Day's Night and Help. Yeah. Beatles cartoons, the dummy of the group, you cannot take seriously. So you have these whole belief systems forming around, well, he's the luckiest guy on the planet, or John himself said, who's the best drummer in the Beatles? Or he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles, which he never said. Stupid shit like that, because he didn't offer up a counter narrative to, he just did his work. Yeah. That's how I think it takes root. But anybody who knows anything, especially starting with if you're a musician, you never, ever underestimated Ringo. You knew he was the secret ingredient. They weren't making it without him. And after he entered the fold, they took off. I don't think that's an accident.
I don't either. His portrayal in the Maysles Brothers film, The First Visit to the U.S., how can you not love him? How can you not love him? And he's the best actor of the bunch, I personally think. So. Mm-hmm.
He definitely had that skill set for sure, and it's no accident he kept getting cast in films.
No, he's essential.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine John, Paul, George, and Fred?
Pete.
No. No, he's the curl at the end of a dog's tail. He's just that little extra thing, that was always there.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then I do want to say, it just was so obvious to me, the fucking genius of Paul McCartney. My God. I mean, I've always thought of the four and how they're connected. But he really was, maybe he was in love or something. Come on, he just kept rolling them out.
He's on fire.
Yes.
And that's just 1 month of 1969.
I just thought, it's not that he's like greater than, and it wasn't that I felt he was greater, but you can't deny something there.
No, you can't. And I think that is a good illustration of the creative process, because number one, it's like as natural with breathing with him, just pulling melodies out of the air. He's got that for sure. He's got that facility and that capability of going into the zone to create this stuff and tune out everything else, and it just comes out. But also, as creative people, as all of you can attest, much of it is the work ethic. And their work ethic was incredible. At a point in their career when they did not need to do this project. They did not need to be working as hard as they were. They had nothing left to prove to anybody. And it's Paul, because he is the workaholic, that keeps putting these projects in front of them, and they dutifully fall into it. They take on this incredibly high bar of, well, yes, we just spent 6 months crafting a double album. Yes, it just came out weeks ago. But we're going to do a whole new album, all brand new songs, and do it in 3 weeks. And they walk away with 3 number one hit singles.
Pretty amazing.
I think that the emergence of George's confidence in his musicianship and his vision and his songwriting. Can you imagine that? And then he's up against Paul McCartney, trying to emerge that, trying to be listened to and heard with somebody who is just in the stratosphere.
Right. And had been told so by Bob Dylan and the guys in the band in America just before that. And he comes back to find the same group dynamic as he faced in 1958.
You could feel George, yes, you could feel all that pain. You could feel him trying to be taken seriously. And you could see Paul going,
As you do with your younger
Paul
brother.
was up here. And I don't want to break him out as separate from the others, but he really was coming from somewhere, I don't know. And I understand that, how you can be on that level at times in your life. Of course, he was in love, and the first part of love, you ascend into places and things happen that maybe wouldn't come if you were down. And then I think about, so what was the genius then? They were all bringing. George was emerging. Ringo was rock solid and steady as usual. Paul was in the stratosphere. What was John doing? John he's the jelly that kind of butters, it's on the sandwich. He's just in there, you can't be up here doing this or emerging without John saying, yes, at the right time.
Right.
Knowing exactly when to interject the thing that needed to be in there.
It is a very fascinating dynamic to watch how they react to him in this diminished capacity, because he is on heroin. He is creatively, having spent himself on the White Album with all these great songs, he's struggling clearly to come up with material, and Paul calls him out on it, and it turns into that whole little comic sequence with the boom mic. But they still look at him as their king in exile or something, waiting for him to come back and occupy the space, and we react to him. You see that when they moved to Apple in the SATB Raw studio, suddenly he's a lot more present than he was at Twickenham. But you do get the sense that the word leader gets used a lot as applied to John and the Beatles. I think that was truer of the earlier years than it was by their mid-years, where you got Paul driving all the projects. Nonetheless, he still has something he projects that they react to. And absent that, they're just kind of spinning in circles. They need him to step up in some capacity. And I think that was a lot of George's frustration, was not only was he not present, but Yoko was sort of usurping his role as mouthpiece, which is a lot more evident on the tapes than it is in the film.
Yeah. You see so many times John would be like this, nodding out. And it's like, oh, I don't want to think about that. He even talked about abusing his body. He knew it.
Yeah.
And I think he realized he was not fully there. He didn't like that. But when it came time to it, he would be there. Being present in the music at the moment was number one for him.
You definitely see it on the rooftop. And that was where you get that John Lennon classic stance from 63, 64 back, which I hadn't even noticed in Let It Be before, but now you see it on full display. He's back.
He finally came back. And that's why I think Paul was whooping and hollering so much, because he felt that. He knew they were performing as they should.
Yes. It was the Beatles again.
The Beatles.
It was on that rooftop, wasn't it? Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was them standing there in their proper formation.
It was cool to see the messiness of the creative process in there. Just the sort of moments of sheer trying to push that boulder up the hill and going in circles and not getting very far. And then you take a little break and play oldies and have your little moments of comic relief and stuff like that. But a lot of it is tedium in the creative process. The public only gets to see the final results of that moment of gold that you've created, not recognizing all the energy expended in getting to that point.
We also learned, though, a creative secret for all of us is that if you can't come up with the right word, just substitute any word you want to, keep on going, and then you go back and do the word.
Yep.
Just keep it going. I think that was really a clue to songwriting for everyone, to just keep that music going. You'll get the word. Just come back.
Yeah, don't let that be your brick wall.
Yeah, they say that for writing too. Just write. Just do it and it will come.
Cauliflower. What was interesting about that moment was when George throws that out there, he's addressing Paul, who kind of deflects, but it's John that immediately seizes it and helps him out, which is so counter to what had been the prevailing practice at that point.
Yeah, I love that moment.
I love the moment, and so glad it's caught on film, where Paul sitting at the keyboard and that guy that, whatever his technical role is, I can never remember what it is, but he's explaining, this is all the songs in the world are right here.
Yeah.
And, yeah. What was the other great line? He said something about only you can stop yourself from stopping yourself or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was such a cool moment of him imparting wisdom in a way that you don't really see. But boy, was that stuff to live by and take seriously. It's like he just laid a jewel on you. Keep that in mind going forward.
Mm. So there was a comment, somebody, Facebook, came on and wondered what I thought about it. And they were waiting for me to comment. And I said, I can't. There's no words. Mm. And then I started to get mad because many people were posting about how they were comparing themselves to the Beatles. And I kept thinking, you can witness the creative process. This is a master class in the creative process. Right. And you can appreciate and enjoy what you saw on every level, but never, ever, ever think that you can compare yourself to them. Sorry. I'm just like the Beatles. No, you're not.
This is why I always say my spirit Beatle. Like earlier when I said I relate the most, I always say, well, today my spirit Beatle is Ringo, or today my spirit Beatle. That's the fan, huge fan inside of me. I'm like, my spirit Beatle.
Heather, what do you think that this does for the fandom? We know that they said statistically it was mostly an audience of over 55s that were watching it. But I'm thinking in terms of having had so much about their process and inner workings revealed, is it going to change much in terms of how people see the Beatles? I'm wondering, with especially the younger generations who are not as in thrall to the mythology and all those aspects of the people who have had, 50, 60 years to think about this. We talked about it humanizing them. Where does that place them in terms of status? Is that a good thing for their legend going forward, or is it something that diminishes them? I'm wondering what we think about that. What did this do for them as people, as an act?
Well, I have some insight on that.
Okay.
Because I have a kid. When this came out, right after it came out, she went to Art Basel in Miami with her graffiti team, and they were doing wall art and graffiti art. And I said, oh my God, you're going to have to watch Get Back. It'll be the talk of Basel. Everybody in Miami is going to be going crazy. It's going to change the world. It's like everything. It's giving hope to humanity. I'm talking like that. Okay, well, she still hasn't watched it. None of the graffiti kids watched it. And she never heard anything about it at Miami Basel. And I said to her the other day, what are you waiting for? It will plug all holes in your life. Because she likes the Beatles. Of course, she grew up listening to them with me. But there hasn't been much interest. For her, it means sitting down and watching it. And she does everything on her phone.
Right.
And she's busy with her business and this and that. And even when she was sick she had the mild COVID, I said, oh, this is a perfect time. It'll lift your spirits. You'll feel better immediately. Just didn't hit. So I don't know.
Well, it definitely jives with what we know about social media, the various platforms, and shorter is more effective. And younger generations seemingly don't want to sit through something that requires a lot of effort and time. Maybe that's the next move on Disney's part, is chop it up into little bits and throw it up on TikTok and see what happens.
Show the 1 hour version.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll hold their attention. And then for a group of people who then find that intriguing, they'll want to see more of people who are interested in the roots of what their music is and where it came from. So maybe it just needs a bit of a rebranding to get out there. But it is what it is. And I think it's wonderful that it was done and we got to see these insights. And, I think it's just a matter of time. The way Let It Be, the original one, is there and for people to watch. And I think this new document will be there. And therefore, historians and people like Allison, who have really studied on a certain level the Beatles and their influence and people around the world. I think it's just wonderful that this document will exist, and whether it changes the mind of people who follow Billie English or whatever, you know what? It's all time that erodes. Listen, I never thought I'd like jazz when I liked the Beatles, okay? Never thought in 1965 from screaming at Shea Stadium would I just love jazz. But now I love Chet Baker. Mm-hmm. And it's like my tastes have expanded. So you know what? It's just a matter of time for people to evolve as well. And I'm so happy that it's done. And, you know, if some kid who's 17 says, oh, I don't like the Beatles, you know what I say in my head? Just wait.
Just wait.
Just wait. It'll come around to you and you'll get there. And so it's just a document in musical history. And I'm just happy that it was made and we all got to see it. And whether it skews to 55 plus, that's the way it is for now. But then I see people like Allison, in my opinion, youth. How many times do you hear? I work with someone who said they put Beatle music on or they listen to Breakfast with the Beatles and their kids love the music.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They love it. The child was sick. We put on Beatle music. You know what? It made them feel good again. So you know what? If it's feel good music and they're a feel good group and, you know, they'll always be there. So you know what? We don't have to worry about that because their place is secure. We don't have to worry about them making this big thing. People in their time will discover if they're not already fans. And maybe those kids in the back seat who love listening to Beatle music, when they become parents, they'll put it on and their kids will enjoy. But we know that history is set with them, that they're going to endure. And it's just fun for us to have new things coming out to keep us enthralled with their legacy.
Yeah.
You know, it's a wonderful place to be. I'm glad I had it way back then. And guess what? I'm glad at my age now, there's still stuff like us to sit here and talk about. Wow, you know, I don't have to scream anymore about the Beatles, but I do get to feel the flutter in my heart and happiness.
I will say that some Gen Xer friends I have, they like the Beatles and they know the relevance of the Beatles. They loved Get Back. They loved it.
They sat through all of it?
Yeah, they sat before I did. So
Wow.
that was instant. Did you watch it? I was like, no, I'm waiting. I'm waiting till I'm ready. I mean, I have now, of course, but at the time I was like, no, I'm waiting. So yeah, I think it has. And the fact that it's on Disney is very important. At first I was annoyed by it. And then I was like, well, that means it's access to a lot of kids who have Disney and maybe they don't watch it yet, but maybe like Deb said, maybe they'll come around to it. You know, maybe they will. And I know, because I've taught high school, there are very young people who still just absolutely love the Beatles, and they're going to go on their journey, their Beatles journey. And hopefully this is feeding it. Like Debbie said, I'm just glad it exists. I didn't expect anything like this. You know, I don't know, Robert, I'm not an encyclopedia like you are. So I didn't know how much footage was out there. I never really paid attention to it. This was just such a nice surprise, a gift.
Artfully presented, yeah.
Yes.
When Deb was talking about when the kid was sick and playing Beatle music, I was thinking, well, maybe Michael Lindsay Hogg was onto something, having them play a concert at a hospital for sick kids.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Not really sick kids. I mean, kids with broken legs.
Right.
Kids with broken legs, yeah.
I don't think they'll ever be a teen sensation. That's the thing. You know, they're never going to catch that 13-year-old crowd by storm to the point where they'll all be screaming through the streets anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they have a lasting legacy because they're good and the music is good. And more songs about positivity prevail in time. And that's what they're about. They're always loving and yearning and hoping, aren't they? And more of that music than sad songs. But yes, we do evolve. We do appreciate. We find niches that we like. I love Britpop. Thank you. I don't know what it is about England, but all of my favorite bands are from England.
What if it's a Midwest thing? I would say the same thing.
We have
Really?
that in common. Me too.
There you go.
You like the Brit stuff? Oh God, I love it. You know,
Yeah.
everything. So I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's our idea of exotic. You know, Manchester town, or Manchester schools, whatever the songs are. But yes, they have an enduring quality. And Deb, yes, I have evolved too. It's not jazz, but I do like. Oh, I never say this, but I like Frank Sinatra.
Oh, yeah, me too. No, I've always liked Frank Sinatra.
He was a local boy for you.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't listen to him all the time. But you know, I appreciate that. God, he had a career and he's good. He was good. Anything that's good. I like classical music now. I've been listening to.
My 96-year-old Nana saw Frank Sinatra live. She's from near Brooklyn, so yeah.
Yeah.
She sounds like it too.
They're all good, but there's nothing that I prefer more. Although I'll have to say, with my love of the Beatles, I cannot oversaturate myself. I'm not going to get sick of them.
Right.
Sometimes you can just be like, turn it off already. It's too much. Where's your saturation point? Where does it go from fascination to, psycho something or other? I don't know.
Obsession.
I think only when I get into a conversation about the Beatles and it becomes a I know more than you conversation, and then I'm done. I was like, nope. No, this I love because, four people with similar experiences could sit down and talk and have a completely different conversation about fandom. And that's what I really do love is that, there'll be a listener who is like, that's not how I saw it. That's not how I experienced it. And that's great. Share your experience. That's okay. And I actually had a question for you guys. Is there any other band you'd want to see this much footage on in the process besides the Beatles?
Not for me.
Not
No.
for you.
Not for me either.
Mm.
Mm-mm.
Poor monkeys. I would see the Who anytime, just because Pete Townsend's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I couldn't think of an answer. I know that's crazy.
But with the Beatles, you got four strong artists within the same ensemble, and that synergy is what I think is so compelling. They're fairly unique in that. There's other bands that are bands, like The Doors or U2 or something like that, but I don't know anyone, and not even myself, that would want and sit and listen to isolated tracks and unreleased material and hours of multiple takes of stuff the way I would with the Beatles. And even the Beatles, at a certain point, it's like, okay, I don't really need to take 35 of Long and Winding Road, but almost anything they touch, and certainly anything that gets put out through official channels, I'll at least give a listen to and find something of value in it. So there is that.
And keep discovering things. Like now I'm like more interested in, I never listened to the individual albums too much. I did have at first. I listened to their first individual albums, but at a certain point I quit listening to Paul's stuff, Wings. I've never listened to any Ringo albums.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I am exactly the same. Exactly. People ask me all these questions of, this and do I listen to that? No. Okay. I have to really be very specific and say, I am a Beatle fan. That doesn't mean that I, sit there and I listen to Ringo albums and I listen to John and Yoko music and I listen to this. No. And in my head, I look at it's the Beatles as a unit, as a group. Yeah, I appreciate their individual career. If I hear something, I loved Paul's Flowers in the Dirt. I call it my traveling music because I was in England one summer and it had just come out and I would go to places and I put the little cassette in the car and I drive to Flowers in the Dirt and travel. But bottom line is that I identify myself as a Beatle fan. I appreciate their individual careers. And as I said, I'd listen, but I'm a Beatle fan.
Yeah.
It's the group.
So you never felt they disappointed you?
No, I really didn't. Not at all. Not for a minute. Not for a minute. That's why I still appreciate them individually today, because they are part of that bigger whole thing, the Beatles to me. But if someone said to me, are you a George Harrison fan? Are you a John Lennon fan? You a Ringo fan? I can say, I appreciate them individually and I appreciate their work. I said, but if you ask me, I'm a Beatle fan.
Yeah.
I go from those early days and my youth, and I'm a fan of that. So that's why I thought Get Back was so interesting, because it does really come at the end of what I look at, myself. I appreciated All Things Must Pass. I love music, concert from Bangladesh. I appreciated that. I appreciate everything, but I consider myself a Beatle fan.
Get Back gave us a new tea bag.
Yeah.
There was strength, there was all this energy and all this information and movies, and they were at the beginning of their career and through the middle part. There was a lot that came out. And then it just sort of seemed like they weren't making the scene, and the news was a little negative, and they were getting wives, and it was changing. But this Get Back put it all back into that strength that had been there earlier. So it was like, oh, yeah, it sustains that which from where it started. It sustains it through.
I think I know the answer for the first generation fans, but Allison, maybe you can chime in on this. Did the Beatles coming into your life affect your life trajectory?
Of course. I mean, I went and lived in Liverpool for 3 years. I've told my students this many times. There was no trajectory for me to go even to college in the first place. And when I left high school, which I did not do very well, and it's not because I couldn't have, but I wanted to work more. I didn't want to be there. I didn't have that group. I didn't have whatever it was to be the person who really enjoys belonging in high school. And I moved to Austin because I'm from Spring originally, just outside of Houston, and I couldn't stand the suburbs, and I wanted to be around music. And I was a huge Beatles fan. I just loved music. I just wanted to be around it. Wasn't a great musician. I played open mics and stuff, but I wanted to write about music. But I just didn't know how to get involved, and at the time I wasn't a great writer, and like anything, it takes practice. And when I decided to enroll in community college, I remember seeing an advertisement from a professor who's passed now. He was a rock critic for Circus when Louder and Frick were there, and Lee Moore. And it was a picture, the Young Lion one of Jim Morrison, and it said it was about a rock literature class. And I was like, wait, this is what college would bring me? I can talk about the Beatles? I can talk about the Doors? I can talk about whatever I want in university? Because I decided I would major in history and go through that. And I did. And the professors, when we got to the point where we could talk about, I remember one of my first papers I ever wrote for music and social movements in Dr. Deidre Landon's class was about Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. And then I started moving towards, I think I did another one with Pete Seeger on the George Wallace campaign. And I wrote one about, just a conceptual paper. It didn't have anything to stand on about Paul and revolutionary rhetoric and language. I started to find the space. And then that Hope Beatles master's degree popped up. And I was like, I'll never get in. I'm not that kind of student. I'll never get in. I started at a community college. Usually they make fun of us. My friends did, sure, at UT. They'd be like, oh, you're at UTC, good for you. And then I did that and lived in Liverpool. I never even thought about Liverpool. I never thought about any of that. I would have never gone in that direction if it were not for the love of the Beatles. And I didn't know anything. I was only 24, just about to be 25 when I went. And I did not know what I think others knew. Like, I didn't read a ton about him. I didn't know much about George Martin. I knew he was involved, but it took me time. And that's not really what the courses were about either. That was knowledge you kind of expected to have already. So just being in Liverpool and then returning for the doctorate, it was just, oh man, that was all because of the Beatles. So when people say that, oh, it's just a band, it's just this, and it's like, no, my whole life, I'm here right now with you guys because of the Beatles. Even little things, daily little things that I think about, there's a little bit there, and in my work, I can't be a fan. I got to step back. So today it's really fun to be a fan. But yeah, there'll be times when I don't really think about the Beatles or listen to the Beatles for a while. But in lockdown, every day my walk went by Mindips and then up Beaconsfield by Strawberry Fields. And I would walk back by the church and go to my house. They were just always there. And I didn't take it for granted. Some days I didn't even think about it. I'd be like, oh, cool, John's house. Because I felt like I had to, I was like, well, I have to. I'm here. I won't be here. But I don't know. It brings me, I said earlier, my fandom is really sacred. It brings me great joy, and to shorten this long statement. I would have never gotten to this place or to where I am in my life or gone down the same path if it were not for the Beatles. I wouldn't have done a doctorate. I wouldn't have done any of that if it weren't for them.
Carol and Deb, did you land where you did because of the Beatles?
Oh, absolutely. First job out of college, I went and worked. I didn't choose it. They came to me, so it was purely coincidental, but I went to work at CBS in New York and worked with many of the people who were associated with the Sullivan Show. And it was really very exciting. So I chose my career in television. After I sat in that audience on February 9th, I realized, wow, how much fun is this? So what I started to do is write for tickets all the time to go to the show. I would write in, sometimes I'd get them, and sometimes I wouldn't. So over the course of 1964 and 65, you had to be 16 to go to the show, but I wasn't. I was 14 and 15, but I still went to the show and I got tickets and I went there 12 times. And the reason I know I went there 12 times is I have a little autograph book. And after the shows, I would wait at the 53rd Street backstage entrance and get autographs and everything. I know who I saw live on the show. But the first thing I did when I got to CBS is I went to the files on the 28th floor at Black Rock and went through them and looked for pictures of the Sullivan Show when the Beatles were on. And I got to see them. And that's how I spent now my 49th year working, soon to be my last year of working. But the irony is that through all the Beatle years and everything, I have now, after I left the show I was working on for many years in a long career, I am now working with the man who owns all the Ed Sullivan shows. And so I get to sit here at home and I watch some of the shows that I was sitting in the audience of. So basically my life started with going and sitting at the Ed Sullivan Show. And today I'm still watching the Ed Sullivan Show. And just last week, Andrew Salt, the man who owns the shows, asked me if I had a middle name. And I said, no, I didn't have a middle name. He goes, well, I'm giving you one. It's Sully Sullivan. From now I'm Debbie Sullivan Sully, now called Sully, because my career started and ended with Ed Sullivan, which is pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
The person that gave you the copy of Please Please Me from Britain in 1963, before they could even get arrested in America, so the person that essentially set you on your path,
Yes.
Are they still among us?
No.
Okay. Were you ever in position to express what you did, that purchase you made that day in England and brought that back to me, changed my life?
Yes, absolutely. My mother passed away and she came from New Jersey to Los Angeles to be with me when I gave birth to my daughter, and we were always in touch. So she knew the importance. She and her husband helped me at my Beatle fan club dance, raise money for the Beatles charity. She was always there aligned with my parents through the whole thing and came to the end, so that she was around till the early 90s, so got to really be aware of a lot of my involvement that sadly my parents didn't, although my mother was alive for one event, which was really great, when I hosted Mike McCartney at my house for the release of Mike Mac's Family album.
Yeah.
And so my mom was still alive when Mike and his girlfriend at the time, Rowena, his daughters, were in LA at my house. And I had a big shebang, including the highlight, Little Richard came to my house, not to mention Graham Nash and guys from Badfinger and Joan Collins and her husband, who was still alive, Ron Cass. It was quite a Beatle British evening, but she knew the importance of the life. But
This is fascinating how your parents, which was sort of atypical, I would imagine, for the time, supported you every step of the way on that journey.
Yeah. I think parental support is probably the most important thing. And I tell everyone, never say to your child, you're just a kid. And what do you know? That is probably the worst thing that you can ever say to a child, is that I really feel that a parent's role is to support their child. And my mom got abuse. I remember one night I overheard her on the phone. Someone said, well, why isn't Debbie doing this or doing that? And she's reading all those, for Allison, teen magazines, teen magazines. Why? And my mother said back to that woman on the phone, I'm happy to know she's at least reading.
And I quote you on that. I quote you.
Did you really? And I always think about that moment, because it's how I tell my daughter to raise my grandsons too, and how I raised her, is that you never tell your child how insignificant what their interests might be, that it's not important.
Yeah.
Encourage that kid.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, the friend of your brother's who brought I Want to Hold Your Hand to your house back when, whose picture sleeve you still have, did you ever in any way convey to him how life-changing that moment was for you?
No, he's a jock. He's a coach.
Okay.
He didn't care.
So you wouldn't appreciate it. Okay.
Unlike Deb there, I didn't have a lot of family support for what I was interested in. And you had originally asked the question about how did this affect the life? And, it's obvious in my book, and I talk about how I had no agency over anything, living out at Fox Lake, which is 50 miles out of Chicago, the third kid in a Catholic family, working class family. I found them on my own. I loved them on my own. I built my world and I just had a hunch, instinct. I'm very emotive type. It was everything. And I let it guide me and drive me, and seeing Get Back affirmed for me that my hunch was right. And that this whole life that I've built, like, okay, you start out thinking, oh God, I love these guys. I love this music. I can't even say the words, I love it, because it's part of my DNA so much. And then I had to build a life without direction. I gravitated towards my creativity. I let my creativity and my intuition guide me. And now I've built a life and a career as an artist, and as someone who goes into places. You go into the unknown. You don't exactly know what's going to come out. And things, yes, they just come out of the ether. So seeing Get Back said, that's why this affirms that even though I haven't known in my conscious mind where I was going or what I was doing, it turns out it's all correct. And it's because something that they sparked, their being them, sparked. And here I am finding myself and my own voice and my own creativity, and seeing Get Back affirmed again. Yes. So something about them is something about who I am.
And you multiply this times the millions of people that aren't on this podcast that have very similar stories.
I'm not them. I'm not going to compare myself, but something about how they are is in me, has shaped me. But it's not something I did. It's just there. We're all captured into some essence.
Yeah, no, it was latent and they activated it, your reaction to it.
When I listen to words, it's like, yes, I hear people saying the words, and yet I can't articulate well. I never can articulate that thing well.
Words only go so far.
Mm-hmm. Words like endless rain. Wait, words are coming down like endless rain into a paper cup. Most of my life is tuned into how something is coming across as sound more than visual. But this then that was a marriage for me. It was like, okay, I got some visual to go with the sound. And the visuals delivered 100-fold. I'm not disappointed at all.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by the Corgis.
SATB
on the frame of your image here, the door in the back is forming a B. Your head is an E. There's an A in the background. The little square where my picture is forming a T. There's an L at the bottom with the 3 dots, and then the E with the album. All you need is an S in this picture of you, and you are Beatles. You can just do that with your finger, right next to the album.
Her earring is an S.
Yeah, there you go. So you spell out Beatles.
Look. Well, even this room, we just got a house. Even this room, I call it my Sgt. Pepper room. It just came together. The colors.
It's coming together.
It's coming together.
And I'm reading the same thing there with Deb. I can see Beatles written out in her walls and I'm visual. You're right, Robert. I see things. I'm seeing things here.
Yeah. I need to get myself like a Beatle room or Beatles shelf. I actually have a Beatles shelf downstairs of some of my memorabilia. It's just a little bit. I keep it tasteful.
It's been funny watching Zooms because mostly people have books in the background that you can see what their house is like.
Yeah.
And I've been looking at Robert's clock. It's still, 8:20?
It's 7:22, and history people know why that is.
History.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know why that is.
Okay. Allison? No?
Put me on the spot.
Okay.
I have other Beatles podcasts.
There was like an old advertisements for clocks. A lot of times they would put the hands at 7:22, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the tale that got attached to it was because that was the moment Lincoln died. And so they would set the hands. That clock's not working, so I set it at 7:22.
I used to teach early American history, but I don't have all the little details like that in my head.
That's all I know is old details.
So in this podcast, the last time, what was the feedback on us talking the last time, Robert?
Oh, they loved it. It was all overwhelmingly positive, and I think that it was a real service for people that are students of Beatles history to get firsthand stories from the people that were there that, in their way, completely sort of rewrote the history of Beatles screamers and what people thought of them as these empty-headed idiots mindlessly braying at the Beatles instead of people with lives and engagement and hearts and feelings, and certainly the aspect of, they just want to have sex with the Beatles, that nonsense. Allison, you could probably say more.
The feedback I got was really good. I thought it was very positive, the idea that people are actually listening to the fans who were there and were part of something. And the questioning, that's where I got a lot of feedback too, is that that went well. Even when I meant to say, what do you still do to celebrate? I still said, do you still bake cakes? But I meant to say, how do you still honor them?
Can I tell you, when it became George's birthday shortly thereafter, right, on February 25th, I actually woke up and I said, okay, so I have to bake because I felt so badly that I had never baked birthday cake.
Oh,
any of the Beatles.
Look what you did, Allison.
I had never baked.
I had only bought them, but the questioning I got a lot of good feedback on was it wasn't about, who's your favorite Beatle? Oh, do you know this, that, next thing? It was about your experience, and I think that's what was really, really beautiful. And I wish more people could see it, Robert.
Oh, they will. Hey, the record behind you changed.
I know, I changed it when we were talking about Sgt. Pepper.
Is that the Pepper? Is that the historic Pepper you laid in the bed and listened to?
All the Sgt. Peppers.
I have 2. I think this is the one my friend gave me. He unfortunately died, but it had the piece in it.
What label? Oh, it's Apple. So that dates it to 71 to 75.
This one's a later one. Okay. I have 2. So
it's not later than that with an Apple label.
Yeah.
Trust me.
I don't have the other. I only have what I'm currently listening to.
I have a public service announcement.
Okay.
My albums, all of my albums that I had, I wrote the word Tyler on the curve of the rainbow on the inside label.
Uh-huh.
And when I lived in New York City in the 80s, I entrusted them to this guy. I said, as I had to leave town, I was like, could you hold on to my Beatle albums? And then you can send them to me later. Well, he never did. And then he got divorced, and his wife, I don't know if she has them or sold them or what, but I never got my albums back.
Your original 1960s Beatle albums that say Tyler on the label.
Oh,
All right.
wow.
The greater tri-state area, you've been put on notice. Start looking.
Keep your eyes open for my records.